That was a very interesting first half hour of the show with Hen Mazig discussing history of Jews in the Middle East and how, history has kind of ignored the persecution that was taking place and the expulsion from their homes that the Jews were subjected to back in the 1940s. Everyone's thinking about what happened in Europe, but not what was happening in the Arab countries. And I think it's very important to keep these things in mind. And I want to divert a little bit away from Israel, though, and the Middle East, and connect this to the idea that I think people get very comfortable with the way society is. They get very comfortable with the idea that, well, this is the way it was yesterday, this is the way it is today, and this will be the way it is tomorrow. And those people that lived in those Jewish communities that were subjected to so much persecution in the 40s to the point that, they were finally thrown out and had to migrate to Israel. The thing is that these communities had lived in these countries for thousands of years. All right? And then all of a sudden, whammo, things change. Now, there's a lot of reasons for it. We could go into history about why events took place that all culminated, got everything focused on that particular population in the 40s. But what I want to do is connect this to a couple emails I received. Now, this may sound this may sound like I'm veering off topic even again, but I'm not. And I received a couple emails in reference to my book series, Freedom from Conscience. And someone was asking about the third book. They had read the description. And the one, Freedom from Conscience, Deliverance from Evil. And they asked me, because they hadn't read any of the books, they asked me, are you trying to glorify psychopaths? Are you making psychopaths into the heroes, the persecuted minority that needs to step forth and save the world? And the answer to that is no. It really is a no. The thing I want to point out is that the character, even though she's a young psychopath, and of course in the first couple books she starts out being a vigilante serial killer, going after people that have really done nasty things to other people and have gotten away with it. And the thing is that what I chose to do by making such a character is it allows a person to be able to explore psychology, philosophy, and sociology from kind of a clear perspective. Because, see, a psychopath is not clouded by emotions. They're not normally very susceptible to sentimentality. They are very cognitive oriented. They're very able to look at an issue kind of in a cold, calculating way, very similar to, Mr. Spock on Star Trek. And the thing is that what separates them perhaps from people that have Asperger's is that the Asperger person can feel deep emotions. They have a hard time expressing them, and therefore they have a hard time reading other people's emotions as well. Whereas a psychopath can, they don't really experience very deep emotions except perhaps around very, very, very close family and so forth. But the thing is that they can read it in other people and mimic it very well. So they're able to know when someone's sad or happy or whatever and be able to act accordingly if they have a goal in mind. But the thing is, what I wanted to do with the third book was deal a lot with this whole idea of a developing dystopian future. And the idea that at any given time, society could collapse. That everything we took for granted now could end tomorrow. And then where would we be? So the plot, without giving too much away in Deliverance from Evil, is that our character, who's been so strong in the series, the first 2 books, and has led somewhat of a charmed life, although has experienced some tragedy, is suddenly thrust into a situation where they become the victim. They're kidnapped by an individual who is, I don't want to use the word, prepper, but more in the lines that, maybe Charles Manson, how he thought that society would collapse and that people would come to him at the end to become, they wanted him and his family to become the rulers of this devastated society. Well, in this particular book, what you have is that without this guy knowing that this person's a serial killer, has kidnapped her, and his goal is to make her his apprentice. And the thing is that throughout the book, he describes his vision of the cities collapsing, the people rushing out into the suburbs, and basically somewhat of a Walking Dead sort of scenario, where only the strong survive, and initially you just have utter devastation unless you're prepared for this sort of thing. And of course, he's got lots of food and weapons and so forth stored. He, though, is also a serial killer. And his way of getting back at God for tragedy in his life is to show that he has more power than God. I mean, he goes out and kills God's creations. And so what you have there, in a sense, is the main character, Melanie Lindbergh. She is kidnapped. Just before she's taken a shower, she's suddenly confronted with this guy who's been hiding in her basement. And he, at gunpoint, takes her to his lair out in eastern Oregon. And I think what I wanted to do there was symbolize the idea that everything you know could suddenly disappear overnight. You could have an economic collapse. You could have a war. I mean, take a look what's going on now with the United States and Russia. And now, it's like America doesn't have enough to bite off if it takes on the bear. It also wants to take on the tiger. It wants to go after China. And so American foreign policy right now is seeking to isolate and, prevent the growth of Russia and, of course, then its economic and military influence in Europe and the Middle East. At the same time, they're trying to prevent China from having any kind of influence in Asia and the Middle East. Now, of course, Russia is interested in the Middle East from a strategic standpoint, as well as alliances with countries they do business with, such as Syria, such as Iran. China depends on the Middle East. Traditionally, China's been very isolated and never really cared much about the Middle East at all. But when it industrialized, it needed oil. And so they get a great deal of oil from Iran. And so part of America's strategy, still rooted in some sort of crazy Cold War sort of thinking, Machiavellian, it's us against you versus, well, let's cooperate. The ultimate goal, I think, is to take down Russia and take down China. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to suddenly go in there and take over. If you take a look at Libya, the United States went in, bombed the heck out of it, and just kind of left it there. And now it's a total mess. It's not even really a country anymore. And they want to do the same thing to Syria, but Assad has hung on a lot longer than the U.S. government thought he would. Of course, ultimately, I think the goal there is for the United States is for Syria to just turn into a huge mess, a bloodbath that could actually wind up exterminating a major genocide against the Alawite Shias and the Christian and other minorities and secular Muslims, they're Sunnis in Syria. and then at some point just say, hey, we got to come in here and do something about this. This is terrible. And then wind up, kind of in control of the region, along with its allies, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. But the thing is, if at any time any of this goes wrong, if something bad happens, if we wind up with a major war, what happens then? We have a situation in which all of a sudden, we're not used to this idea of suddenly a major war. And I don't think America is in any way psychologically or financially or in any other respect ready for a World War III. And therefore, if something did happen, if something happened to disrupt the way things are, the way things just normally flow in the world, what happens then? Most people aren't self-sufficient in the United States. Most people don't know how to change a tire on their car. Come on. Most people wouldn't know how to grow a tomato if you gave them the seeds and the instructions. They wouldn't know how to plant. They wouldn't know how to do anything like that. I mean, think about a total economic collapse. Think about what happens when we don't have an economic collapse. Think about Christmas sales where people get trampled to death, because people are trying to get a half off on, I don't know, women's underwear or something like that. And think about what happens if instead there's no food. Okay? And that's the scenario I tried to get at. And so you get this dialogue, even though the main character is subjected to months of rigorous brainwashing techniques, actually very similar to the ones that were pointed out that the U.S. government uses. They paid a whole bunch of money for, and I had my rough draft done for that book long before that was leaked. So they could have come to me. I don't know. I think they read the book and got it for free, but they spent a lot of money for their techniques of breaking someone psychologically. But even after the main character is almost entirely broken psychologically, she's still able to communicate her ideas with this gentleman. As, they sit on the porch and he's training her, every day on how to survive in the woods, how to survive with alternative energy, how to basically become invisible but still live a pretty good life. And the thing is that you have this dialogue in which somewhat of a Nietzschean philosophy comes across. You get this sense of, what I try to promote at least, is a sense of questioning what is the individual's responsibility in society. I mean, what also is the level of individuality a person can really expect to live? Because you have one person that goes all the way. I mean, he preys on people. He also just doesn't want to be bothered. He's, just waiting for this apocalypse that he's sure is going to happen. And then he's going to come in and be a leader of some area of Eastern Oregon or whatever. Of course, his prediction being that, cities like Portland, San Francisco, Seattle would not survive such an apocalypse. You would have a situation in which the people in the cities would flock out into the countryside, but by the time they would make it out to a place like Eastern Oregon, they really would not have much of a chance. I mean, not very many would make it, and would probably be stopped by the people in the hinterland long before they would actually reach the really rural areas. But the thing is this. I'm just wondering, if we take a look at society today, if we take a look at modern America, if we take a look at, our institutions, what the heck is going on? I mean, seriously, what the heck is going on? You have a situation in which there are Christians and other minorities being wiped out over in the Middle East right now. And I mean literally wiped out. People giving their lives. You don't hear about all that much unless there's some big event like, ISIS takes out, a couple dozen Christians on the beach and cuts their heads off. But it's happening every day. There's people being sold on, girls sold on slave blocks who, don't happen to be part of whatever group ISIS likes. And the thing is this. You have very little attention. Everyone's focused on freaking, trivial issues. Everyone's talking around the water cooler about Bruce Jenner. Okay? I mean, seriously, does a guy who is going through some sort of metamorphosis, is that so crucial that that's what everyone's head is focused on right now? Our collective unconsciousness is being, in some way, I don't know, it's being polluted by these trivial issues. These issues that have nothing to do with our survival. And, that's even in the national media. You take a look at local media in the United States. I remember the town I came from when you actually still received a newspaper back in the 1990s. And, there would be, the front page of the newspaper was what I considered the interesting part, because it had all the stuff about international events and things going on in Washington, D.C., and occasionally things going on, in the state, that were pretty big things. And do you know what was interesting? If you look at it now, most people don't even read newspapers. So if you go to the website of local newspapers now in the United States, often it's really trivial things. There's a lot of sports. There's a lot of entertainment stuff. If you do find something dealing with international events, it's like just maybe 3 paragraphs long. And you know why that is? Because the media and the people that kind of run it for profit have figured that the average American has an attention span of a goldfish. They can read about 3 paragraphs if they're committed to the story. And that's with a big picture on the, the page too. And now it's getting even less. I've noticed now you'll see, even in alternative media, you'll see a little tiny story and a whole bunch of tweets, which are basically sound bites sent out to everyone's, list that they have on, on their Twitter. By the way, anyone wants to get on my Twitter, it's a Psycho Mike. Okay, it's a little circle thing, and it's Psycho Mike. Now, the thing is that the population's getting dumbed down. Things are getting kind of out of hand, but maybe people just have been trained not to think about it. And this is why, for instance, my books are actually designed to answer that lady's email. The books are designed to get people to actually think. So seeing the world without the emotional filters that most people put up, without the glaze and glitz of modern society, in which there's a person very focused, non-emotional, but still with a lot of ethics and a sense of justice, who can think her way through this, this current state of affairs in the United States. And so, in a sense, the books are not actually books about a serial killer, really. I mean, that's part of, there's violence, and it's part of the plot. But it would be like if you had a book about George Washington, and then someone said, well, what's the book about? And said, it was about some people, the Americans fighting the British. It was talking about some battles. See, it's not the main thrust of what you would talk about. And that's not the main thrust of my work there. And again, it's not promoting a psychopath personality. It's just using that to be able to analyze where we are going in this society. And therefore, use someone who's a total nonconformist in order to say, wait just a minute, something is really, really wrong in the way things are. We don't have a media that's committed to informing. It's not committed to exposing things anymore. Just get their sound bites, usually from the government. We have, and that's the big media, the 95% that's owned by 6 corporations. We have an education system that is very strongly aimed at conformity. The first book really gets into attacking that for sure, because, it's set with the backdrop of her in high school. But the thing is, we have an education system that has many wonderful teachers. I mean, seriously, I don't get down on teachers. There's a lot of them out there that are doing their best to teach these kids. However, we also have an education system that you got things like, Common Core and things in which, come on, parents first of all, you'll have educational bureaucrats, again, not teachers, I'm talking about the administrators and so forth. They'll say, well, we need more parent involvement. And then when you do have a meeting in which people are talking about these so-called reforms, the administrators feel very threatened by that. They feel like, oh my gosh, how could these parents be coming in here? And there's been some cases where, parents have actually been threatened with arrest if they speak out too much or they take a little bit more time than they were allotted by the bureaucrats. And then at the same time, it's very strongly conformist. Have you ever asked yourself why it is that if you go into a school in a large high school in Maine and you look at the culture, let's say you're like a sociologist and you're going in and doing an examination of high school culture, and then you go to a high school in, Washington State, you'll find it kind of is the same thing. The culture's the same. Now, why is that? Is that by coincidence, or is it part of the institutionalized structure? And if you are someone that's bullied, like the main character was originally in the series, if you are a student that's bullied for being different, who is there to blame? Maybe it's the actual institution itself that is to blame, and therefore needs to be exposed. So people can think about it. So people, especially that have children in the school systems, can think about what's going on. And then you have, what is it about religion in America? I center on this a little bit in the 3rd book. What is it about religion? Again, you've got all these things going on in the country. You've got things, Christians being persecuted around the world. And, what do they talk about? It's kind of a feel-good thing. It's like taking a daytime talk show host spiel about whatever issue, adding some amens to it, and that's what religion has evolved into in the United States. So essentially, we do have a decline in culture, and that's what I was trying to get at in the 3rd book. That you've got to be prepared for this. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the ending is, but the thing is, eventually you do have a confrontation. Eventually you do have a rivalry that starts to grow between these 2 characters and also some other characters. But the thing is, people have got to be jarred into kind of thinking about these kinds of issues. Where are we going? What could happen? What would be how would you feel if tomorrow, using the metaphor, someone grabbing you out of the shower and hauling you off into the desert to brutalize you? What if tomorrow everything just ceases to be what it was? And you've got to learn to survive in that kind of climate. Could you? Could you provide for your children and for your other loved ones? That's a question that maybe it's very important for everyone listening to actually ask themselves. Because maybe if you're unsure, then you need to start thinking about it. Because maybe tomorrow won't be as comfortable. 3 years ago, those people living in Syria, 3-4 years ago, had a nice standard of living, nice homes on the Mediterranean. It wasn't exactly the, a shining example of democracy, but it was a stable government and a stable economy. And now it's chaos. If it can happen there, what's to say it can't happen here? And maybe that the main villain in the book I wrote, maybe the main villain has a point, at least when it comes to, you're wanting to be prepared for the worst so that you can be ahead. Anyway, I just wanted to leave you with that thought. And I hope that you'll tune in next week for another episode of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.